Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josephine Watson, and I'm the Commercial Project Editor at iGaming Business. We're happy to be hosting a webinar for Worldpay this afternoon, and we'll be discussing their latest global gaming payments report. Based on research from 16 key countries, this report aims to understand and present the latest information about how people pay, the top alternative payment methods, and regulation changes. Additionally, experts from Worldpay have researched some of the hottest topics for the gaming industry, including PSD2, future market opportunities in Latin America, new demographics, invisible payments, and all the excitement surrounding sports betting in the United States. Your hosts for today will be Joseph Papano, Senior Vice President, and Ian Kay, Relationship Management Director at Worldpay. Joe's joined us today despite feeling a bit under the weather, so thanks, Joe. He's been an advocate for the industry for more than 26 years, and his efforts span gaming and payments, working with issuing banks and the card networks to bring key merchant category codes to the gaming industry, and working closely with legislators and regulators to help define an environment where operators can accept card payments in emerging markets. Having worked with the gaming industry since 2006, Ian Kay's focus is shaping innovative global payment solutions and developing many operators' international strategies. Over the years, Ian has developed a wealth of expertise both in iGaming and payments, including operator expansion models, optimization, regulations, product, and strategy. There'll be a Q&A section following the presentation, so please do submit questions as we go along, and we'll try to address as many of them as possible in the allocated time. With that, I'll hand over to Joe.
Yes, welcome everyone, and we appreciate you investing the time to hear more about the extensive movement within the international markets and the U.S. markets surrounding payment acceptance and how we lean an industry forward to make the transaction safe, secure, and frictionless. As articulated, I've been with the organization going on 27 years, all specifically at Vantiv, now Worldpay, building out all of our various sales support and distribution channels. And over the last 8 years, focused my attention on leading the largest gaming expansion in the modern era within the U.S. market. So welcome and look forward to our discussion.
Cool. Thanks, Joe. And just to introduce myself, my name's Ian Kay. I'm the Director of Relationship Management here at Worldpay. I've actually been in the industry just approaching 13 years now, but the last, I believe, 8.5 years of which have been within the payment space, and spent the last 6 years working within kind of the heritage Worldpay's relationship management function for gambling. So just to, I guess, to sort of take everyone through some of the things that we're going to be talking about today, relating to sort of some of the research that Worldpay has undertaken, kind of a little bit of the background to the global gaming payments report. We'll sort of look through some of the kind of future trends and future markets. Joe's going to talk in some detail relating to the developments in the last 12 months within the US market, which is obviously very prevalent with everyone's mind. And then we'll be just talking about a few sort of like non-US global breakdowns of a couple of sort of key gaming markets. So firstly, the background to this report actually dates back, I guess, like into sort of just before sort of 2009, and this was actually sort of when Envoy Services, prior to the acquisition by Worldpay, when they actually started, led by Phil McGriskin, actually developing their own sort of global payments reports. We've continued that tradition at Worldpay since the acquisition of Envoy, extended it across a greater number of products, beyond sort of alternative payments and moving into card acquiring and gateway services. One of the things that we actually looked at a couple of years ago is that the growth of sort of alternative payment methods was happening on a sort of significantly global scale. However, they weren't always in markets where gambling merchants of ours would actually be able to operate. So we took the decision to move to two reports. So we actually do a deep dive specifically on gaming, which is what we're going through today. And we actually have a wider global payments reports, which addresses industries outside of gaming as well. So both of those reports are available on the Worldpay website. one of the things that we looked at when we were looking at this year's reports was the idea of a changing demographic. Obviously, everyone on the call, I'm sure, will be aware of kind of the proliferation of mobile and particularly the prevalence of sort of smartphones, specifically sports betting as being kind of the lead product area of gaming in that sense. We are in summary dealing with an sort of even more informed and mature consumer when it comes to sort of gaming, and the level of information that we see consumers having, whether it's related to the brands, the odds, the games, and actually sort of how the user journey and sort of the payment options actually suit those of individuals. So it was a really important point to kind of call out. And I think sort of the standout stat that we've kind of seen here is, in 2017, more than half of the world's population is under 30 years of old. So it's that sort of changing demographic that's kind of really driving things there. One of the things that we looked at, and it's obviously sort of kind of a big piece within the gaming space, is the idea about sort of instant gratification. That is an expectation for kind of the modern consumer, and probably even more specifically within sort of the gaming space. If you think about sort of high volume transactional events, particularly sporting, and particularly sort of the rise of in-play betting within those markets. The user journey is really important, I think, in every single vertical that Worldpay operates in. But I think gaming is probably slightly nuanced in the fact that the user journey is actually sort of, very important when it comes to sort of the kind of deposit and withdrawal functions. And we'll talk a little bit more about fast funds later in the presentation. But, the experience of actually sort of the money moving out has significantly improved in the industry, and it's going to become more and more important. This kind of expectation of payments just happening, and I think the sort of demand and sort of, I guess, almost contradiction with how do you securely authenticate your users and providing that security as well as a kind of a seamless user journey experience. I think the PSD2, specifically strong customer authentication, is going to have a particularly significant impact on the gaming sector later this year, particularly when you're looking at the sort of the introduction of 3DS2 and sort of a move to kind of more secure authentication as an overall piece. This has been something typically the industry has resisted to, certainly when we compare at Worldpay the prevalence of sort of, secure authentication versus other sectors. It's typically been seen as a kind of a barrier conversion by most sort of gaming operators. We looked a little bit more kind of sort of with this idea about sort of, the seamless nature of the user journey, this kind of the idea of the invisible touch. And we talked a little bit about, sort of the payment methods and about that ability to kind of suit the user. We actually surveyed within our sort of mobile payment journey marketing piece, which was that, over 59% of participants would actually be willing to use a different payment method if they were able to receive their winnings faster. That's a pretty compelling statement in the fact that sort of the prevalence of sort of the speeding up of the money out function within gaming. We've obviously sort of touched on a little bit around sort of the fast access funding, which I think obviously, is being enabled by Visa through their Visa Direct product, where payouts can be made in real time and under their scheme guidance, actually under 30 minutes. MasterCard are going to be following up later this year with their own products offering MasterCard Send. Probably the thing that's most interesting to me as sort of, someone that's been in the industry for a long time, but also, a customer within the industry as well, is sort of the idea about like, how do we make that experience better and easier? And one of the things that we looked at, which had been adopted by a number of operators, was that kind of deposit within the bet slip type setup. And I think we have seen, obviously through our research, 57% of people would like to have that functionality when they're actually placing a bet. And what we've seen from some of our sort of more forward-thinking merchants is actually sort of, a greater development and finessing of sort of that user journey to not only enable that, but actually enable specific payment methods such as mobile wallets, as Apple Pay, within the sort of the bet slip itself. So the fact that you can almost have that one-touch yet secure authentication is a real game changer, particularly when we're talking about sort of the prevalence and the continued rise of sort of mobile within the gaming sector. And sort of just one of the things that last I wanted to touch on before Joe sort of picks up on the US is at Worldpay, we make a significant investment within sort of looking at the global markets where gaming is applicable. Now, the regulation of gaming is pretty much a hot potato most of the year, and things change pretty quickly. I mean, since I think we were preparing for this webinar, there's been some pretty significant developments in the Dutch market. The Brazilian sort of piece is changing a little bit, and I think Brazil and the Netherlands are two interesting ones where, for the first time, I think we're seeing real clear paths to regulation. But when we say a clear path, it may be clearing, but it certainly still seems to remain a very long one. So I think we're possibly still talking, 1 or 2 years away. Another market that's making a bit of noise in Latin America is Argentina, where we can sort of see that provincial level sort of framework that's sort of starting to come into force a little bit. And still sort of there's a few interesting markets, sort of outliers. So India continues to be something that we're keeping a close eye on here at Worldpay. Obviously, everyone will be aware that the US market has probably been sort of the most significant regulatory development, and obviously having one of the preeminent experts in the field, Joe Papano, on the line, it's probably best at this point to hand over to Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So when we take a look, just a level set, gaming has existed for decades in the U.S. market. And when you think about it, over 40 states today have either tribal casinos, land-based casinos, racetracks, and or state lotteries. So when you think about the expansion of gaming to be inclusive of internet and mobile, it's quite exciting because you already have an inherited framework related to the KYC, the AML, the controls that have already existed for decades in gaming within the U.S. market. A lot of what's happening is really as the expansion continues for online gaming, poker, and or sports betting, it really comes down to that education and educating everyone within the ecosystem. And it starts with the state legislators to pass law that makes sense in regards to support of the gaming expansion. It's working with the gaming regulators as they create the operating environment. How do we make that safe, seamless, and secure and frictionless? Working with the card networks, the issuing banks, the gaming platforms, the content providers, and the overall all the ancillary services as well. It's bringing that entire ecosystem together to be aligned to truly drive the adoption and the overall success for online and mobile in the internet market. When you take a look at what's being rolled out today, it truly will inevitably tie to an omni-channel offering. Based on some of the rules, based on what's already existed and rolled out, they're leveraging the licensing and the framework and the controls of the racetracks, the casinos, and the state lotteries. So when you think about that rollout, they are leveraging the licensing of those. Now, what differs based on the state-by-state rollout is, what's the tax rate going to be? How many number of skins will I allow the lottery or the land-based casino to have? And or will it include some form of mobile or internet component? So the movement of this drive in the U.S. market is truly going to drive a single frictionless experience that inevitably will be an omni-channel offering. All these casinos and billions of dollars were spent on casinos, obviously to drive demand online, make it seamless, make it frictionless, but inevitably they want to be able to drive value and bring them back in to the land-based casino, whether it's tribal, commercial, or the state lottery or what have you. So we are clearly monitoring what that ecosystem looks like and how we help evolve the industry as it ties back to truly that omni-channel offering. When you take a look at the brisk movement, in total, you have 8 states or jurisdictions that have already legalized and or have live sports betting today. Of those 8 states, some of them have an online or mobile component, some do not. There are 25 additional states, hence the 25 and 8 making 33 states where we are going to have movement in 2019. You have 25 states today that are considering and have some form of legislation that's been introduced and or being reviewed at this point in time, which shows the significant impact and the demand and the excitement for obviously this gaming expansion tied back down to an ecosystem that's already existed in 40 plus states throughout the U.S. market. Based on the initial data set that has existed and the success that we've seen in the New Jersey market, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Back to the point that Ian made earlier, we live in a world of instant gratification. Everything we do in our lives are spent with that mobile device in our hand. So in order to truly optimize the revenue streams and the corresponding consumer experience, there has to be a mobile or internet component that allows me to seamlessly engage in the activity, whether it's internet gaming, poker, casino, sports betting, lottery, whatever it may be. I have to feel comfortable using that mobile device and making sure that that component exists within the jurisdiction is critical. Hence, we know it's not going to be conducive for everyone to get in their car and drive to a casino to make a bet. So obviously, with knowing 2/3 of all sports betting revenue is being derived by online and a mobile component, it's imperative that the appropriate controls are in place. And we will touch on this later surrounding geolocation, the KYC, the AML, the device fingerprinting, insulating to make sure that we collectively as an industry protect the integrity of that transaction. So as states are contemplating rolling out and adding an internet or mobile component to the rollout of sports betting, it's imperative that these controls exist to protect the integrity of the transaction, the operators, the brands, the card networks, and most importantly, the player. So there is tremendous excitement in the U.S. market. Everyone is aligned within the whole ecosystem to truly lean the industry forward, knowing, and this has been cited by multiple sources, specifically the American Gaming Association, that this is a $150 billion revenue opportunity in terms of gross gaming revenue, top line revenue, and the ability to combat all the illegal activity that's occurring today. So there's been a lot of time, energy, effort, and resources, a lot of involvement related to education in terms of the state legislators, the gaming regulators, the card networks, and the issuers, the operators, the ancillary service providers, to bring everyone together and unify the industry as we create the overall strategy within the U.S. market. So that, I know we'll have some Q&A later on, but obviously the excitement of leveraging a framework that's already existed, coupled with the payments industry that has existed for decades, which is built to protect and already has inherited protections for the consumer as it relates to velocity controls and responsible gaming, bodes extremely well to optimize and truly take advantage of the evolving U.S. market. Ian?
Cool, thanks, Joe. And as Joe said, we're going to have a fair bit of time, I think, at the end for a bit of Q&A, and I appreciate pretty much for most of the merchant conversations I have, there is a US gaming element to that, so there will definitely be the opportunity to ask a few questions relating to that. Obviously, the US aside, there is a world outside of the US market, and I'm not going to talk through every single one of the countries that we've kind of put within the global highlights, but it was just a flag, I think, here that there's there is very much some nuance related to the different parts in the world where gambling merchants do transact. And that can be within sort of payment preferences, that can be within the regulation and how that enables different things. And this is sort of continues to be like sort of an ongoing kind of passion of Worldpay's is continuing to increase our knowledge, like on a per market basis of sort of the payment method penetration, and also sort of any sort of expected nuances that we come in here. Within sort of the Australian market, I mean, the regulations in Australia are pretty strict. It's obviously sort of state limited and limited to sports betting on the whole. So it's really important that gaming merchants kind of have confidence in that their payment providers understand that landscape and are able to sort of navigate it, whether that's using sort of your traditional credit and debit cards or alternative payment methods like Poly, BPay within that market. Belgium's another example of a fairly heavily regulated market. It is probably one of the examples, along with the Netherlands perhaps, where the sort of the payment landscape is dominated by one single payment method in bank contact. The other one here just to touch on, I think, is Denmark, which is sort of interesting from the fact that not only does it hold a regulated market position, but also it has sort of the highest smartphone penetration across Western Europe. So we're talking around e-wallets and really sort of the rising of sort of the mobile wallets, sort of predominantly in gaming, Apple Pay and Google Pay. So it seems pretty straightforward that if you have that level of smartphone penetration in a regulated gaming market, adapting your kind of payment flows, and particularly the ability to be able to offer mobile wallets is going to be pretty important within that market. Sort of looking some more, I guess, to the traditional sort of Western Europe with France, Germany, and Italy here, and again, not wanting to go into any of these in too much detail, but I mean, France is interesting and quite unique in the sense that the RGL regulations don't allow payment of winnings back to card in their sort of traditional format that we would see in other markets. So merchants that operate in that market or are looking to operate in that market will need to sort of adapt their processes to be able to pay out to their customers in different ways. The most common that we see here at Worldpay is certainly by bank transfer. Germany, which I think is fair to say has had an interesting 2018 with regards to regulation. Germany remains a huge gaming market for a number of merchants, and also is quite an interesting market where it's so sort of driven by the sort of the real-time bank transfers and e-wallets such as PayPal. So I think we certainly see like Sofort, which is now owned and operated by Klarna, and GiroPay and PaySafeCard to be sort of the preeminent payment methods within Germany. A German consumer seems to take a lot more confidence within a bank transfer than actually operating a card payment, which you would see in sort of comparative markets such as the UK. Italy. So Italy's an interesting one when we talk about sort of, we can see that mobile commerce is growing substantially across the region. So again, it makes a lot of sense that making sure that we have sort of mobile friendly alternative payment methods, and again, sort of the e-wallet, the mobile wallet space becoming quite crucial in this market. Whilst mobile commerce is growing quite heavily in Italy, obviously the ability to market for gambling merchants is sort of doing the complete opposite. So that's again, kind of a key factor within sort of any sort of gambling merchant approach to the Italian market. Mexico is quite an interesting market for Worldpay. I think we've looked at this in quite a lot of detail across various different verticals since sort of the joint venture regulation has existed there. We've seen a big increase in the number of merchants that we have that would operate in that market, and sort of unique, purely localized payment methods like Todito Cash would be a particularly useful addition to sort of traditional credit and debit cards within the Mexican market. The Netherlands, sort of obviously we've touched on just in light of the fact that there's been a kind of significant development within that market, that we are finally on the sort of the clear, if not slightly long path to regulation. most people will be fully aware that Ideal will be the sort of the preeminent payment method, and it is pretty much impossible to be able to sort of operate, I think, within the Dutch market, and certainly moving forwards in the regulated Dutch market, without being able to use sort of the national bank transfer products. And just touching on Russia, I think Russia's an interesting development in the fact that the market has regulated previously, but I think in sort of enforcement within that market has sort of taken slightly longer term, with many merchants sort of operating both a .com and .ru regulated business. I think the real game changer probably came around October 2018, when Sberbank, the largest issuing bank in Russia, actually started enforcing issuer blocks on credit and debit card 7995 transactions. We've seen this, and while some merchants still continue to operate sort of from that kind of .com basis, there's more and more issuers are being sort of wrapped up into these blocks. So it is kind of moving into kind of the wallet space, I guess, in Russia is where we're seeing a lot of trends moving to. And sort of last and not least, before we go into the question and answer session, I think it's sort of a couple of sort of interesting markets. Obviously, Joe's talked in detail about sort of the emergence of sort of esports and sports betting, which is like absolutely transforming the US gaming market, and the fact that that's sort of the joint venture with sort of land-based partners sees, we very much see that's going to be a growth of sort of an omni-channel type model over the next few years. The UK, it's always difficult, I think, to find anything particularly interesting to talk about payments when there's it's kind of a Visa debit led market. Now, that's changing a little bit. At Worldpay, we've seen a massive uptake of the sort of the mobile wallets, and sort of in line with sort of the PSD2 SCA, we actually think that mobile wallet growth will actually continue to skyrocket over the course of this year. Interestingly as well, MasterCard are actually gaining market share in the UK, so they've obviously announced their deals with TSB and Santander, so they're actually going to be sort of taking well over 20% of the UK debit market. So the UK payments landscape is still very sort of debit card driven at the moment. Sweden is definitely an interesting one, actually sort of formal regulation as of the 1st of January, and a number of sort of bank and bank transfer products have actually introduced a service that almost sort of uses the payment method as sort of like a conversion tool within the user journey. So by effectively just using the consumer's bank account to actually sort of populate the KYC and CDD information that gambling merchants require to meet their sort of regulatory obligations, that's been a real game changer in Sweden, and something that we've seen has sort of like driven growth for a number of key customers. And Spain is, we've talked about sort of like fast funds as being the model. Like Spain was actually one of the first countries to really enable at an issuer level Visa Direct. So sort of the increase in sort of fast funds has definitely been pretty substantial over the last few months as well. So that's, a pretty sort of quick 30-minute run through and summary of sort of the Worldpay Global Gaming's Payments Report. I definitely recommend anyone that's like on the line of the webinar to actually like go through the full report in detail, and sort of speak to like any sort of Worldpay contacts, relationship managers, if there's any questions that arise from that. I mean, outside of that, I mean, Joe and myself are around for sort of the next sort of 20 to 30 minutes to answer any questions that anyone's got on the line.
Great, guys. Well, thank you both for a really interesting presentation. Some great insights in there that are really exciting for all of us here today to hear, I think. As Ian said, we're moving on to our Q&A segment now. So please do continue sending in questions. I can already see people are just giving you guys praise for a great presentation. So the first question we've got today is, with the rise of mobile gaming, how has this changed the demographics and player expectations when they make payments?
Yeah. Okay. So it's in here. I mean, it's a good question. And obviously it's always helpful when one that we sort of covered early in sort of the presentation. I mean, ultimately, Joe talks about it when referring to the US market. It's that piece around, instant gratification, like how quickly can we like satisfy the requirement when we're talking about whether it's placing a bet, whether it's, you know, a stake in a casino game, like all of these kind of things. And I think it's the ability to be able to fully capture the payment process within that user journey. And probably a good example of that, where it hasn't worked particularly well, is probably within sort of 3DS. So 3DS in its current guise, and we're sort of very quickly moving into the world of sort of 3DS2, but 3DS in its current guise doesn't really support mobile browsers. So if you are, you know, a betting merchant that wants to be able to utilize within a mobile user journey, 3DS in its current guise, built 20 years ago, is really not fit for purpose. So I think it's really about the industry and payment providers and card schemes and ancillary providers actually like building technology that suits the mobile consumer and the mobile user journey. We've definitely made some strides in the right direction, but we're not quite where we need to be, in my view.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, specifically in the U.S. market, you know, mobile obviously is critical, but back to having that, you know, framework in place surrounding the controls, that will be a requirement on a state-by-state basis, because the rollout of sports betting and other forms of gaming in the U.S. market is going to happen on an intrastate basis, which means activity that any bet or wager that occurs within the state of New Jersey, the resident needs to be within the confines of that state. So there's a lot of complexities to ensure that we protect that ecosystem. And what you're going to see happening, and based on the the federal and state requirements and the gaming requirements, you are going to see that happen on a state-by-state basis, which means a lot of complexities, a lot of controls, a lot of questions surrounding where does my technology or server need to sit? Where do my ancillary services that I'm providing, where do those resources need to sit? And that's what we are helping educate and guide the industry to ensure that we don't disrupt this massive opportunity in the U.S. market, but it is going to happen on a state-by-state basis. The goal is when you roll out that mobile component that the different jurisdictions or states will align to try to create some common framework that can be replicated on a state-by-state basis. So obviously, there's a lot of uniqueness that is occurring in the U.S. market, but because it's for the first time, you're having the convergence of two highly complex, highly regulated industries finally converging in payments, in gaming and gambling within the U.S. market.
Brilliant, thanks guys. I think it's always really exciting when new markets open up for gaming. What do you think is coming next and why?
I guess, I mean, it's always difficult to tell with the new markets. I mean, we spoke a little bit today about kind of Brazil and the Netherlands, and I guess there's a difference between like a new market or a market that's kind of, I guess, coming back, for want of a better expression. And what I kind of mean by that is that you have certain markets that people have operated in, but then they've clearly like introduced law which has made like betting and gaming like fully illegal, or you have markets where it's never had actually distinct regulation, and so people have operated on a grey market basis in lieu of regulation coming forward. I think Brazil and Netherlands look like two very interesting markets, and obviously there's been a lot of press in the last couple of weeks around those two particularly. Argentina is very interesting for us at Worldpay. We think that's going to be quite an interesting market over the next sort of 24 months. India remains definitely very interesting about how potential regulation and actually how payments will be kind of like led and driven. It's big focus on sort of mobile payments, particularly sort of carrier-based billing, which is typically a fairly expensive payment method when you take into the revenue share required with the mobile carrier. They would be the sort of the key markets that we're kind of seeing at the moment. But there's always, things change so quickly. I would hazard that if you were listening to this in a year's time, it's going to be a very different picture.
Yeah, and hey, I'm gonna just add some color because I know some questions have come up surrounding Visa and MasterCard surrounding fast access fundings or pushing gambling winnings back to a debit and or credit card, specifically in the U.S. market. And what I want to remind everyone, within the U.S. market, the legacy or the international gambling merchant category code that's utilized, 7995, that does not exist in the U.S. market from an online perspective, meaning if 7995 were used for a online gambling transaction, it would automatically be declined based on the history, and we can provide additional updates to that. A new merchant category code framework was created in the U.S. market a number of years ago to provide better transparency to the issuing banks based on the type of activity. You had merchant category code 7800 for lottery, 7801 for internet gaming and sports betting, 7802 for horse racing. Depending on the skill-based game or daily fantasy sports, Visa used 5816, MasterCard used 7994, because it was critical that we had to drive acceptance from a debit and credit card perspective. Visa has been incredibly bullish in regards to supporting the U.S. gambling initiative and movement for gaming, gambling, and all the different nuances within that ecosystem online. Visa does now, as part of their operating regs, they do allow gambling winnings to be pushed back to a consumer's debit card. Visa has mandated that all the debit card issuers accept this type of transaction, which we're calling fast access funding. You may hear it referred to as Visa Direct or push payments, where within 30 minutes, a player can receive their funds and those gambling winnings can be pushed back to the debit card of their choice. It does not have to be the same debit card that was used to fund the wagering account. The credit, pushing it back to a credit card in the U.S. market, so all the integrations, all the operating model, all that now exists, and that is being offered as a product in the U.S. market. Right now, in terms of pushing winnings back to a credit card, we are still trying to understand which issuers on the credit side will participate in fast access funding in order to get winnings pushed back to a credit card. So right now, debit card is fully in play, and we are, obviously monitoring the different issuers, the acceptance, because it is mandated. Credit seems to be a little bit behind to understand which issuers will participate, but that will dramatically change the consumer journey and the experience when they can feel confident that they can put money within the wagering account, and they have a very seamless way to pull money out of that account via the Visa debit card, MasterCard. As Ian pointed out, that will be later on here in 2019 that they will accommodate a similar model. But because of the new MCC framework in the U.S. market, providing better transparency and clarity to the issuer has allowed Visa to feel comfortable of rolling out this product and being quite aggressive in the U.S. market.
And sort of on the topic of the US market in general, taking it on a sort of a bit of a broader view again, it's made headlines over the last few months with sports betting taking off. What do you think it means for operators, and what do you think we can expect to see next?
Well, look, I mean, every day you're seeing a new partnership being created, whether it's between an individual, whether it's the sports leagues, whether it's the individual teams, whether it's the online gaming operators or platform providers that are doing partnership deals with the land-based casinos. You're seeing just tremendous movement. You're seeing a lot of movement surrounding data and data integrity and data deals being cut for real-time data feeds in regards to in-play betting, which you're going to see move very quickly in these states where being within an arena because of the downtime that exists within the U.S. sports market, whether it's the NFL, a football game, or whether it's a Major League Baseball game, there is a lot of downtime in between action. So because these data deals are being cut, the ability to progress the market very quickly related to in-play betting, you're going to see start to play out. So you're seeing a number of partnership deals get done, data deals get done. You're seeing the movement of Visa and MasterCard, and we can touch on this, but you're also seeing within the U.S. market, because of all this brisk movement, you're also seeing other payment networks starting to get involved in the payment ecosystem in the U.S. market. The Discover network, granted they have anywhere between a 10 to 13% market share, but the Discover network will be entering the sports betting industry from an online acceptance. American Express will be engaged in 2 significant pilots for online gambling and sports betting acceptance in the U.S. market. So you're seeing a cascading effect that everyone in the ecosystem is truly aligning to truly optimize and bring the U.S. market to fruition. So again, there's tremendous excitement. There's a lot of movement daily. You're seeing the states quickly line up, as I alluded to, between those that are live and those with pending legislation. You have 33 states of the 50 where you already have movement for sports betting acceptance and the legalization of sports betting on an interstate basis. And our role as Worldpay is to play a much broader role than just being a payments provider and protecting the integrity and providing the additional value-add services. It's to truly educate the gaming regulators, the state legislators on how the payments ecosystem works that ultimately protect the integrity of the game, the financial transaction, and the players from a responsible gaming. So there's a lot of heavy lifting going on, a lot of excitement happening on the macro environment within the U.S. market, and it's prudent that we all collectively in the industry stay incredibly disciplined and stay prudent in regards to how we roll out a very seamless payment ecosystem with the fraud controls, understanding the data, so on and so forth.
And we've had a couple of questions come through on various different specific use cases and payment solutions for different things. One of which being how are mobile payments going to play with loyalty cards in the US? How will esports in the US utilize disbursement cards for payments? What are your sort of thoughts on those areas and what are the possibilities there?
Yeah, and then Ian, you can weigh in from your perspective, but loyalty cards and the various prepaid cards, there's some dynamic prepaid card offerings that exist. The goal is to provide whatever the consumer wants to adopt to or whatever form of payment they want to utilize, whether it's the alternative payment methods and the various digital wallets, whether it's a loyalty card, whether it's a prepaid card or your traditional financial instruments. The goal is to make sure within that cashier, within that wagering account, that consumer feels confident that they can utilize any payment method or any alternative payment method or wallet that they desire. And a lot of that will tie back to enabling the various loyalty cards, because at the end of the day, all of us as consumers, we know why we use the payment instrument, why we prioritize. Why do I use one card or one brand over another? Or why do I use one digital wallet over another? Because of the intrinsic value that I get, the utility of that offering, and the corresponding loyalty and the protections that I get by utilizing that. Our goal is to make sure that we do not discriminate in regards to any of those offerings that a consumer may want to utilize. In the U.S. market, because it's new, we don't know what the demand is going to be for what product. So it's critical, whether it's prepaid, loyalty, any ancillary payment method, the digital wallets, all have to be part of that overall offering. And then over time, we'll see where consumers are navigating based on their preference on what they're adopting of using within that ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, and just to cover it off, I guess, from sort of a non-US basis, I mean, the kind of the loyalty card type aspect has always been a bit of a challenge, to be honest, just for the fact that the omni-channel, omni-commerce remains quite difficult to kind of be able to knit everything up together if you have sort of multiple channels. A number of sort of, kind of the betting operators based out of the UK have been quite keen to sort of get that convergence of the customer that's going into a shop and also online, but I haven't seen anyone really who's been able to sort of nails kind of the sort of the loyalty card in the same way that you would get in kind of the retail sector. There are some sort of quite clever methods that merchants have used when they've kind of branded their own card and had solutions for fast fund payments back. So it's almost by branding your own sort of payment method and card, and kind of keeping a closed loop around that between the merchant and the consumer has been the best way that I've seen so far. But I don't know how successful that's been outside of kind of the VIP part of the industry.
And I think we naturally are going to have to touch on one more thing from the US market that, both from your guys, and I know you've got loads of expertise on, and also our audience is definitely sort of wanting to hear your guys' view on it. Obviously, there's been big news about the Wire Act recently. Can you perhaps summarise and touch on what you think about what's happened so far and what's going to happen next? I imagine, Joe, you'll have something to say on that.
Yeah, so that's a very spirited debate, so appreciate that question. Yeah, I would tell you there's a lot of noise that has happened over the last, call it, few weeks in regards to the Department of Justice going back and reinterpreting the reinterpretation of the 1961 Federal Wire Act that basically now brings all form of gaming, when initially it was reinterpreted that the Wire Act only focused on sports betting and or those companies or businesses that are in the business of betting or wagering, and it did not bring in lotteries, internet gaming, skill-based games, poker, things of that nature. With the reinterpretation that just occurred over the last few weeks, it has created a lot of noise in the market that obviously we are monitoring very closely. It was prudent of us to make sure that there was that we had an unwavering confidence and commitment to the industry, that the industry did not have a knee-jerk reaction surrounding the different business models that have been rolled out in U.S. markets, specifically those being impacted like internet gaming, some of the casino and poker that has been rolled out, and some of the state lotteries. Sports betting, because of the ecosystem being on an intrastate basis, is not impacted. But what I would tell you is there's been a 90-day stay in place. In fact, the other day, you saw the New Hampshire lottery, you saw Neo Pollard and others putting out, lawsuits, basically, against the DOJ, asking for the courts for a declaratory action in regards to truly wanting them to intervene and provide clarity surrounding this new opinion. That stay is in effect until like April 14th or 15th. It is important that everyone understands this is just an opinion. It is not law. We do expect some enforcement action or guidelines to take place over the next few weeks that will provide better clarity in regards to what was the intent of this new opinion. And this is widely known in the industry that it was very politically motivated in regards to that. But where we like it is inevitably this is going to help provide better clarity so we do not have any more obstacles or any more false starts, if you will, related to the progressive movement and support in the legalization of online gaming in the U.S. market. And there'll be better clarity surrounding what has to happen intrastate versus what can happen interstate. So there's a lot of noise, a lot of movement. We have a tremendous pulse on everything going on by working with, again, the state legislators, the gaming regulators, and everyone within the ecosystem to truly protect the integrity of this industry, knowing the size and opportunistic view of what the U.S. market will bring for not just the U.S.-based operators, but many of some of the largest gaming operators in the world coming over into the U.S., right? Surrounding and making sure we can navigate a lot of those complexities. So it's exciting. There's a lot of noise, and we're continuing to monitor the situation, but there's a lot of work being done as an industry to defend and combat what this opinion recently came out and what it means to the U.S. market.
Brilliant. Just as a note to our audience, we're still getting loads of questions in. You guys, testament to how interesting the presentation was, of course. But just a note to our audience, do keep sending them in, because I think after this we're going to forward them over to the guys over at Worldpay. We might be able to send out some questions and answers in an email afterwards. With that in mind, we've got time for one or two more questions, I believe, guys. I think one here that's sort of quite interesting is about what your thoughts and comments are on IDEO in the Netherlands. Obviously, this week's new online gambling bill, there's been a lot of chatter about what the opportunity is going to be for payments firms. What are your guys' view on that?
Yeah, I think IDEO in the Netherlands is, like, as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, it's the preeminent payment method, and has typically been allowed for gambling merchants while the regulation has kind of been formulating. There has been some merchants that have kind of gone against KSA's guidance, albeit there are some questions around how clear the guidance from the KSA, the Dutch regulator, actually was in some of those instances. I don't personally foresee a massive change with the kind of the payments landscape in the Netherlands. What I believe will happen is, ultimately, as we've probably seen in places like Portugal and other sort of regulated markets, like where it's driven by, credit and debit card processing, or like a multi-banco style APN, ultimately it's adopted by those merchants that will go and seek the license in the framework, and actually the sort of the payment network and provider will become sort of less interested and willing to work with merchants that don't actually operate within that regulated framework. So that from lessons that we're seeing in sort of recently regulated markets like Sweden in the last sort of month or two, and probably Portugal a couple of years back, that would be the sense I have.
Brilliant. And then to summarise, then, obviously, this report has looked at some of the gaming trends, the payment methods across the markets. So I think it'd be good just to touch on what you guys think are the key takeaways here. What are going to be the regulation changes and big moves in these countries that you think are sort of indicative of where we're heading as a market?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, like 2019, we've been talking a lot to our merchants about this. It's a big year of change in payments. And we can talk about sort of, changing demographics. We can talk about sort of this, sort of the seamless user journey and that sort of like, kind of aspirational sort of one-click methodology. Ultimately, what's going to be driving the payments landscape in gaming outside of the US market is going to be the PSD2 regulations, and the fact that gaming as a sort of an industry will have to kind of migrate itself. All other e-commerce industries will be doing the same to a secure or fully securely authenticated manner. Now, I would probably argue that the likes of certain sort of retailers, travel, airlines, and probably even a little bit within the digital content space haven't probably got quite as far to go as gaming. So we've always talked about at Worldpay, like cost of acquisition for new customers continues to increase, and obviously sort of the lifetime value and the return of investment of those customers is actually reducing. So it's more expensive to acquire your customers than it has been previously. And I think ultimately, secure authentication, such as 3D Secure, has always been seen as a barrier to conversion. So it's kind of the classic balance between the marketing director and the finance director, I think, within most merchants. So for me, it's a year which is almost solely going to be based around sort of PSD2 and sort of the implementation about strong customer authentication. And there's going to be a little bit of learning from a consumer side. I think, sort of even if you've been used to interacting with retailers in a certain way, kind of after September time, that's going to change. It's probably going to hit gaming a little bit harder than most sectors.
Yeah, and I think from a U.S. perspective, the U.S. is a very card-centric environment in terms of consumers wanting to use a financial instrument. As I articulated earlier, we don't know what the payment method of choice or alternative payment of choice is going to be in the U.S. market surrounding the seamless ability to get money in and out of the wagering account. We have heard for years with I'll call it the abbreviated rollout in the U.S. market in 3 jurisdictions, Nevada, Delaware, and New Jersey, for internet gaming, which was less than 5% of the U.S. population. You had significant challenges with the top issuers supporting and approving and authorizing those types of transactions. With the new framework that has been developed over the last multiple years for the new MCC codes, a lot of what's happening and what we're seeing is getting the top 5 issuers that are driving transactions today, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase, Capital One, and TD Bank in the U.S. market, is to get them to open up acceptance for online gaming and or sports betting. And I will tell you, over the last week, there has been positive movement where TD Bank is starting to open up acceptance for merchant category code 7801. So knowing the U.S. is a very card-centric and trillions of dollars are being spent in the U.S. market on debit, credit, and prepaid cards, and knowing when a financial instrument is utilized, 75% of the time it's a debit or prepaid card, bodes well that we are truly working diligently to have a seamless environment as it relates to the ability to use a financial transaction, not knowing what all the other alternative payments may mean from an adoption or an acceptance perspective, that we have to ensure that the payments ecosystem, because unlike the international and European markets where each country or jurisdiction has different requirements or different payment methods, there's a consistency in the U.S. market where amongst all 50 states, the payment ecosystem is time-tested, it's well-proven, and you already have inherited protections for the consumer. So knowing that, and it's existed for decades, so knowing there's consistency amongst all 50 states in that payment method, it's imperative to us as an industry and as Worldpay to make sure we continue to demonstrate our depth and expertise on educating everyone within the ecosystem, the networks, the new registration process with the networks and their requirements in the issuing banks, because if we can solve the remaining banks, and we've made tremendous headway over the last number of years, if we can get those final issuers on board, that is going to create an amazing foundation in terms of a consumer playing, being able to use a financial instrument. Then we can focus on their preferences surrounding the other alternative payment methods. And we are incredibly bullish that this will be a critical year in 2019 to make that happen with the issuers.
Well, guys, it sounds like it's as much of an exciting year for you as it is for the rest of us in the industry, and we're looking forward to hearing more from you. That is, however, all the time we have for today. So thanks to both Ian and Joe for joining us and sharing your insights. To our audience, the webinar has been recorded today and will be available to listen to on demand shortly for you to rewatch and share with your colleagues. Otherwise, we hope to see you soon.